Hello, wisdom seekers. This is our second lesson on YouTube. Last week we started Isaiah, and this week we're going to have the sixth chapter, which is one of the most famous for Isaiah, in that it's called Isaiah's Commission, and we're going to discuss that. We know last week we studied about in the first chapter, we studied about the empty prayers and the empty sacrifices, that the children of Israel had grieved God, and he was saying, no more. I don't want to see any more sacrifices. I don't want to see any more. Just stop what you're doing. And this was a surprise to them because they thought that they were doing exactly what God wanted them to do. And then we had the beautiful verse in Isaiah 1:18, "Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red as crimson, they shall be like wool. If you are willing and obedient, you will eat the best from the land. But if you resist and rebel, you will be devoured by the sword. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken." Can't get any plainer than that. So we know that they didn't listen, and Israel, Judea, the top and the bottom, they have been pretty notorious for being representative for the world in that they just don't listen. So in today's lesson, we study Isaiah's commission, and although he had been preaching before, he was a man of God, but this is going to take him deeper into his commission. And basically how I feel about that is that, yes, this probably was a deeper commission for Isaiah, but I feel that he was doing God's work before, but God had another plan for Isaiah to have him go deeper. And shouldn't we all be trying to go deeper in our relationship with God and not just stay steady? It's like, what else do you have for me, Lord? Let me go deeper. God had a plan for Isaiah. So as we start studying these first verses in chapter 6, we're going to see God's call to Isaiah, but we're also going to be able to see Isaiah's vision that God was going to give to him, which could have made him very prideful, but we're going to see what happened to him. So as we start, we are going to get a time frame on when this vision happened, and we're going to know that it is this southern part. I'm going to bring out our trusty map, the map queen here. We have the southern part. This is the southern part. This is where Isaiah was during his ministry. And this is where we've got Jerusalem and Judea and the northern part. This is Dan to Beersheba. We know that the great prophet Samuel, his ministry took him from Dan to Beersheba, which just meant he covered the whole area. Very impressive. So we have here where Isaiah was, and when he starts in the 6th chapter, we see that in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. So we're already intrigued by this vision, but he has said that the king has died, the king of Judea. Now, as we well know, when a king has died, the people probably are apprehensive on who is going to be their next king. How will they rule? But with Isaiah's vision, we know that he is being given a glimpse that God is on his throne. He is still in control. So that gives a very optimistic point of view for Isaiah, for this vision, that he can truthfully say, God is on his throne. No matter who is put in charge, I know God is on his throne. And that's what we can say truthfully today. God is on the throne, no matter who is in charge down here on earth, the world, or wherever. So we see here that a veil has been lifted for Isaiah. He is being able to witness an incredible vision. And we're going to see that he has stepped back, he's seen the Lord, and he is seeing the him fill the entire temple. The temple was in his vision. So when we read this, we are almost cautiously optimistic that everything's going to be okay. But if we read further, we're going to see that this vision was of something to come. If we go back to the 5th chapter, we know that we can't just pluck these verses out, and chapters here, chapters there. We have to see what has happened before, what's going to happen later. In chapter 5, we see a very vivid example of God tending a vineyard. And this vineyard is representative of the children of Israel. He puts love and care into this vineyard, but they don't take care of it. They're all in for number one. And so when the fruit comes out, it's bad fruit because they didn't take care of it. So God is placing judgment on Israel for not taking care of this vineyard. So this is why we can't be cautiously optimistic until we see why it's here in context. So the hem of the robe fill the temple, and that way God is drawing Isaiah just in a little deeper as he's getting closer and closer in with this vision. Seraphim were standing above him. They each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. So the wings here are very interesting. With 2 they covered their faces. That's with respect out of God, that this was in reverence to him that they were covering their faces. And with 2 they covered their feet. That is also in reverence because of God's authority, that all of their authority as heavenly beings comes from God, not from them, but from God. These are angelic beings, the seraphim. They are called the burning ones because they're shining and bright. They're part of the highest of the angelic orders. They have a lot of authority, but only what God gives them. And that's why they have reverence for them, and they're covering their feet. And with 2 they flew. This is my favorite. They are always ready to serve. That's the flying. They're always ready for service. And isn't that the way we're supposed to be? Ready for service at all times. So then they are calling to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of armies. His glory fills the whole earth. Let's stop right there. Holy, holy, holy. That is, holy is whole, and it is set apart. But they use the 3 words together in that they are trying to explain that there is no other God like this God. Nobody comes close to this spectacular God. It's a superlative in the Hebrew language, and this is the most holy that it can be. And they are making reference to the earth and how his glory fills the whole earth, in that everything in our earth points to our Creator. That's a beautiful thought. And even then they realized it. Isaiah was witnessing this with how the seraphim were saying, holy, holy, holy. His glory fills the whole earth. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Joellen, I thought of you, in her poetry, penned these 2 phrases. I'm not going to read the whole poem. Earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush aflame with God. Isn't that a precious way of wording it? That is everything pointing to our Creator. That's beautiful. Then the next is the foundations of the doorways shook at the sound of their voices, and the temple was filled with smoke. Now, if you are around teenagers and you have maybe teenage children or teenage grandchildren, you know that with their music, which can be rather loud, that their music would take an extreme back seat to the seraphim calling, "Holy, holy, holy." When they do this, the foundations in the doorway shook at that sound. Now this is pretty impressive. You ought to read this to a teenager, and maybe they'll think, well, maybe heaven's not going to be so boring after all. They won't need their boom boxes in heaven, that's for sure. So at this point is when Isaiah is overwhelmed at what he is seeing. Because of this, he could have been very prideful, but he is stepping back. This is his watershed moment. He is stepping back going, I am overwhelmed, because he is realizing what a sinful man he is, what a broken spirited man he is, and he's afraid. He's afraid. Look at what he says. Then I said, woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and live among a people of unclean lips. That's representing the whole person, the lips. And because my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of armies. He's just laying it all out. I'm not worthy of this. I am so low on the totem pole to be of service for God. I am way down here. This is exactly where God wants him to be. Broken in spirit and not prideful. Doesn't that remind you of something? Broken in spirit. Blessed are the broken in spirit. Jesus himself used this in the Beatitudes. I have the Beatitudes from Charles Stanley that I can read through every day. And the first one is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now this is how God uses us. If Isaiah had become prideful, God couldn't have used him anymore. But because he became this woeful, broken man, God could use him. That's where he wanted him, because then he could elevate him. Isaiah had heard the shaking of the foundation and the singing of the seraphim. But what had God heard? God heard the cry of a poor, sinful man. And that's what he wanted to hear. So what did God do? Well, he dispatched one of the seraphim to help Isaiah. Listen to this verse. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, and in his hand was a glowing coal that he had taken from the altar with his tongs. He touched my mouth with it and said, now that this has touched your lips, your iniquity is removed and your sin is atoned for. This is the altar of sacrifice and purification that he had gotten this coal and put it on his tongue with the tongs. This had purified Isaiah for his next task. And this is when he felt euphoric, because he knew he had been purified. God had purified him with that coal. So we see now that God is definitely getting Isaiah's attention with his vision, but in the right way. So now we're going to hear God speak. We're going to see how, he's in this heavenly council. He's surrounded by these seraphim, cherubim, all of the heavenly councils, and he's saying to them, then I heard the voice of the Lord asking, who should I send? Who will go for us? I said, here I am, send me. This was Isaiah just saying, I want the job. I want the job. Now, in today's society, we would probably be going, I want to help you, but I want to know what the job is first. Can you give me some parameters on what I will be doing? Not Isaiah. He just said, here I am, send me, send me. What a precious thing to say. And he meant it. Now, he wasn't going to have the most pleasant of jobs, but Isaiah was the man that God had commissioned for this assignment. So what did God say? Go. He said, go. Say to these people, keep listening, but do not understand. Make the people's mind of these people dull, deafen their ears, and blind their eyes. Otherwise they may see with their eyes and hear with their ears, understand with their minds, turn back and be healed. Does this sound like a merciful God? It is, because he is giving Isaiah the inevitable results of what they were going to do, because their hearts were so hardened already. I paraphrase this a bit. This is what Isaiah and God would like to have had them hear, but we know that they had deaf ears. Please listen, but I know you won't understand or care. Please keep looking for ways to help, but you're blind to others. If you have eyes to see and ears to hear, why do you close them to God's truth? Are you so set in your ways that you refuse to change, to be healed? You see how these verses are the inevitable results, but they sure aren't the way that God would have wanted them to be. But he knew that their hearts were hardened. In fact, these verses, 9 and 10, are the very verses that Jesus used in the New Testament in Matthew and John and Acts, when he was explaining people who hear but don't care to really understand. Like people today, they will hear the message, the gospel message, but they don't understand. They don't want to understand. And that is what hurts God's heart the most. He sent his only son to die for us, and they don't want to understand why. That's the sad part. Ears to hear, eyes to see, but they won't listen, they won't see. And that's why Jesus used these verses. Hard as it gets when God had to place this judgment, and Isaiah had to deliver it. And it continues, and we hurt for Isaiah on this. He is saying to God, how long is this going to last? How long? And until when, Lord? Until when? And God says, until cities lie in ruin, without inhabitants, houses are without people. The land is ruined and desolate, and the Lord drives the people far away, leaving great emptiness in the land. God's mercy is hard at times. When you read these verses and you know that this is in response to Isaiah saying, Lord, send me, and God gave him a hard message. When we open up ourselves to God's message, has he ever given you a hard message? Have you ever gotten a hard message from the doctor? Have you ever gotten no healing? Have you ever received your time on earth is not going to be as long as you thought it was going to be? Are you surrounded sometimes by destruction and you don't understand and you want to cry out, how long is this going to last? Like Isaiah did. It's easy to do, but I can promise you that God's timetable and our timetable is rarely in sync. It's rarely in sync. We want to see results, and God's timetable may be way further down the line that you may never see, but He has a plan that we have to trust that He knows what's best for us. He always does. And He will always, always have our best at heart. We may just not be able to see it at this time. That's just like when we read the very last part of the verse. Though a tenth will remain in the land, it will be burned again, like the terebinth or the oak that leaves a stump when felled. The holy seed is the stump. You might remember some time back in the Sunday school class, I talked about nursery stumps. Now this is when a forest burns down thousands and thousands of acres. We certainly know that California understands this right now. But when it is burned to the ground and it looks like it will never come back, we know that underneath some of the stumps are what they call nursery stumps, because there are stumps that are alive, and they are what repopulate the forest. And that's what God is saying. The leaves that will be like a stump. When the stump is felled, the holy seed is the stump. There will always be a remnant, a 10% remnant, that they will still suffer, but they will grow and come out of it. You may be part of the 90%, but you may be part of the 10%. Whichever that is, it's part of God's plan that is the best for you. It's a hard lesson, but it's a reassuring lesson to know that God always has the plan in place. We just have to trust Him. I love you, wisdom seekers. This is a wonderful lesson to go through on your own and see how God is always in control and how Isaiah got his commission in the 6th chapter. We will be here next week at the same time, and we will start studying another chapter of Isaiah. I love you, and I will see you next week.